Hello and welcome again to the HR office with Cikizwa Vezile. I am excited once again that we are back with interesting discussions, interesting news and interesting insights. Today we again have a very special guest, somebody that is going to educate us from the CCMA. I hope you are ready to learn today, and thank you once again for making time and view our podcast. Before I start with the day, I think it's important that we introduce our special guest. Our special guest is Geraldine Masunungure. Okay. She is a CCMA Commissioner for the past 11 years. An avid reader with a keen interest in law, she has taught labor law to postgraduate students for Nelson Mandela University. She has developed materials in collaboration with the Material Development Department for CCMA. Her background includes working as a consultant for the International Labour Organization, that is ILO, drafting and compiling a compendium on SADC laws and bilateral agreements that affect the SADC region. She has worked with Business Unity South Africa, which is BUSA or BUSA, to develop a web-based tool for employers and employees that allows them to obtain advice and guidance on labor issues. She is a staunch advocate for raising legal awareness and social justice. So we have somebody that has got an interest in ensuring social justice. Geraldine, thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you so much for inviting us. I appreciate this.
We welcome you in this HR office podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to our discussion.
No, I am. I've been looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it, definitely.
Thank you so much. I think we need to start with our first question.
Talk to me.
I just need, it would be something that to make you relax. I think it's a question that I've asked you earlier.
Yeah.
What interested you to doing law? Why law?
I think growing up, I actually thought I would be a doctor, believe it or not. I thought I'd be a psychiatrist. So later on, I ended up volunteering in abused women's shelters and also doing a lot of work in terms of social justice and social development. And as I was doing it, I just felt like women and children did not have voices. So as I was doing it, I realized that I just had a passion when it came to just really making a difference for people on a grassroots level. And because of that, I thought to myself, how can I lend my voice? How can I make a difference? How can I make the law accessible to people on the ground? So that's what dove me into studying law. And so because of that, I always felt like I had a calling just to try and make a difference and leave a bit of positivity and contribution to society to try and make it better on an overall perspective. Yeah.
Interesting. Just for the viewers, today we've got Geraldine to share with us the mandate that the CCMA has, and I'm sure she's going to help us learn what do we do when we have disputes, etc. So today is basically for us to learn the legal process, especially when it comes to mediation at CCMA. Thank you. The first question, we need you to help provide an overview of the mandate and mission of the CCMA, which is Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration. Just share with us, Geraldine, what is the mandate of CCMA?
So I'm going to try and explain it in a way that is very simplified, because I don't want to sit here and give you legal jargons and then afterwards you come back and you look at, and the person who's a viewer will look and say, but what is the CCMA all about?
Or we go back to the dictionary.
And we go back to the dictionary and you're busy looking in the encyclopedia and the dictionary, Oxford Dictionary, and you're like, what does it mean? So what the CCMA basically does is, because we know that wherever you're going to go, there's going to be contractual relationships. There's an employer, there's an employee. And with that, wherever there are human beings that are involved, it's inevitable that you're going to have conflict. And because you're going to have conflict, you need institutions that are going to help the employers and the employees. How do you manage conflict? How do you deal with conflict? How do you effectively deal with each other? Because we know that there are relationship dynamics that come into play. So what CCMA in essence basically does is, how do we build relations within the labor landscape? How do we ensure that we bring social justice when we're dealing with marginalized employees? We know that if we're dealing with umama who goes to work, she cannot access a lawyer, right? Because it's expensive. You're dealing with legal fees of 5 to 10,000, and maybe that's her monthly salary. So we there not only to offer advice, we are there to also ensure that for any form of dispute that you have with your employer, whether it's wages, we deal with it. We are there to ensure collaboration between the employer and the employee. So we deal with individual cases. We also deal with collective cases where we're dealing with unions and companies where there's wage negotiation, strikes. So our main purpose is to mediate the disputes, and not only mediate, to resolve them, to try and bring about a lasting, sustainable solution in the labor market where we're able to transform the working relations in order that employees are able to be productive, and to also to ensure that there's a balancing act between employers and employees in the way that we build labor relations. So that's basically what we do. We're basically a cornerstone in terms of building relations within the labor market between employers and employees, and that involves a number of role players and stakeholders, including unions.
So in terms of accessing CCMA, can a person find CCMA anywhere in South Africa?
Correct. Like, we are in all the 9 provinces, and even in all the 9 provinces, we've got satellite offices everywhere. So we've got an online service, because we know that with COVID, there's been hybrid working situations where you find that some people are working from home, and everything has gone digitalized these days. So we are also online, where we've got online chatting systems. You can also call us, and you can also walk into any CCMA office and basically say, listen, this is what I'm facing at work, and I'm just asking for advice. And all of our services are free of charge.
Okay, okay, great. The other one that my viewers would like to know, what are the main, I'm sure you have touched on this, what are the main responsibilities of the CCMA in mediating and arbitrating disputes between employer and employee? And people want to know, how does the CCMA contribute to maintaining a balance between the interests of both parties?
So I think when people think about the CCMA, I want them to think about us from the perspective that we are the last body of call, right? So what do I mean when I say last body of call? You know that when you are dealing with somebody and you've got a dispute and a conflict, it comes to us because there's an issue, there's a disagreement, there's something that you're not agreeing on. That means perhaps you have tried to exhaust the internal procedures at work, and you've tried to maybe approach your HR, your union, and you've found that, listen, no matter how I'm approaching them and no matter how much I'm trying to ventilate this issue, I'm not getting anywhere internally. So we are on the last end in terms of the reaction chain, where a person says, listen, I've tried everything internally and I've not had any success. Now I'm coming to you with this issue to say, how best can you deal with it? So now I'm going to explain how we then deal with it. So initially, a person comes in, they refer their dispute. After they refer their dispute, it's then set down by CCMA. So our main role is, we will start with the conciliation part of it, right? So conciliation part of it is, with any dispute and any form of conflict, because it happens in any workplace, the first thing is, you have to realize that what a person is bringing to the table sometimes is not the issue. Sometimes there's a lot of underlying issues. It's like there's many layers to an onion, let me put it that way. So now what the commissioner tries and does in that sort of a scenario is to say, listen, how do I peel the onion so that I come to the crux of the issue? So let's say, for instance, somebody comes in and says, I am being harassed at work, right? If a person is being harassed at work, remember, it's not only the issue of harassment, it's about the working environment. It's about the hostile environment where it's now affecting their work, their productivity, their morale. They may perhaps have had to take sick leave, and it's also about the relationship dynamics. So part of the conciliation is to first, like you, as we're sitting here, is to set the environment where I want to try and investigate in that process, what is the real issue of why you're here today? What is the issue that you're confronted with at work? What are the options that you have explored to try and resolve that issue? Now, when you are coming what then do you feel is the solution to the problem? So then I'll hear that from the employee, but I'll also give an equal opportunity to the employer to then hear what is the employer's take and perspective on it, because we know that wherever we're going to go, there's rules and regulations, there's policies. And unfortunately, the reality is we spend 80% of our time at work and 20% at home. So we take baggage either or. We take our baggage from home to work, and we take our baggage from work to home, and it's vice versa. And because of that, wherever we've grown up, no matter how much we don't realize it, our environments growing up, the way we deal with conflict, for you it's different, for me it's different. You'll find that somebody adapts what we call maladaptive practices, where they feel that, you know what, I need to shout in order to be heard. Somebody needs to be violent in order to be heard. But what we try and do is to try and diffuse the situation between the employer and the employee, number one, is to try and show that there can be a mutually beneficial relationship. So number one, we are trying to diffuse the situation. Number two, we're trying to make you realize that you've got more in common than differences. Number three, we're trying to build sustainable mechanisms and solutions within the employment relationship. Number four, we're also trying to help the parties look more long term. So we're not here for short term to put a band-aid on it, but still the underlying issues are not dealt with. We try to dig a bit deeper and say, what is the real issue that you're confronted with? How can we find solutions that can work also for the entire organization and the employees, so that we can help the general morale and boost, so that both the employee and the employer benefit. So as CCMA, we're contributing by improving not only your hard skills in terms of developing policies and legislation, but we're also there in terms of building the soft skills of how do you deal with each other in the workplace? How do you relate to each other? What are the mechanisms that are in there? How can we strengthen those partnerships with the stakeholders and with the unions in order to ensure that we can deal with things in a way that ends up benefiting? Because let's be honest, you need the paycheck. And the company also needs you. You need each other. So it's actually a mutually beneficial relationship. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, even though it's a mutually beneficial relationship in terms of currency, the reality is we're human. And because we're human, we've got emotions. So how do we deal with those emotions? How do we regulate them? So it's partly law, but it's also partly psychology in terms of how we deal with it. So we conciliate, we mediate, we arbitrate, and we intervene to basically say, how can we bring you together and find an amicable solution that can work for you in the long term and in the short term? That's what we're here for.
Before we go to the process of dispute, I just wanted to check, are there moments where you will find that the employer and the employee are not really finding that common ground?
Correct. I think there are a lot of cases where you find that we look through life through very different lens. Your idea of fairness and my idea of fairness can be very different. Now, what do you do when you're confronted with a situation where one person's idea of resolving the issue and fairness and the other one is completely different, and they're like polar opposites? So what we try and do is, when you find that parties are very far apart in terms of what they want, what you want to try and do is take a bit of a step back. Because what happens is, sometimes a situation looks a bit different when you take a bit of a helicopter view. And when you take a helicopter view, you're able to assess it in such a way that you're able to say, okay, from the outside, I'm seeing these issues, but not only am I seeing these issues, I might be looking and I'm seeing, okay, this might be the problem. But the only way for you to actually actively get a proper solution, sometimes what I do is I separate the parties. Right? So let's say you enter into a volatile situation, parties are polar opposites. What we usually do is I'll separate the parties. In separating the parties, when I engage with you on a one-to-one basis, you find that the tone changes. A person is more open. Then they will let you know, listen, this is actually what I'm confronted with. Because sometimes people are not comfortable telling their employers exactly what the issue is. Then a person tells you that, maybe, listen, I've been affected by more than the workplace. Maybe I'm suffering from depression. Maybe I've got problems at home. I'm not able to pay my child's school fees. Maybe I'm suffering from domestic violence. Maybe I'm confronted with this because I had so many debts in our family. Then you're able to then say, okay, now how do we meet some of these underlying issues that are affecting the fundamental problem? By the time you meet the employer, you're meeting from a different perspective because remember, you can't offer a constructive solution without getting substantive information. So when you're polar opposites, the key goal for me is to try, number one, see what the substantive issue is for the employee. What is the main issue that is the problem? Dig a little bit deeper. Create an environment where the employee feels comfortable enough to say, this is what my issue is, this is what I'm confronted with, and try to find mechanisms and solutions that are tailor made to try and assist them in a way that is a balancing act between the employer and the employee. Half the time, and in almost 90% of the cases, when you then bring the parties together after they've been in separate sessions, you are best able to actually find a solution that works for both parties. So I found that people want to be heard, they want to be validated, they want to feel that you can hear them, you can see them, and not only that, that you genuinely care. And it's not only a tick box exercise that I've come to the CCMA and it's a rubber stamping exercise. They want to feel that genuinely the problem that I have, you're going to meet me where I am and try to assist me. And I think that's the greatest mandate that we have is how can we contribute, how can we assist, how can we advise? But we want you to leave the CCMA and feel, how have I empowered you so that you go back into the workplace and it's better than it was before.
Okay, thanks. You mentioned at the beginning that CCMA is a place where people have done all to try resolve issues.
Yes.
But everything they have done has failed. The solution is still not there. They still remain with the problem. I'm thinking about a lot of people that are scared of going to CCMA, or they don't even know that there is a CCMA and where to start to consult with CCMA. I would like you to walk us through a typical process of dispute resolution at CCMA. What are the steps that are involved from the initial filing of a case to its resolution? Where does a person start? Are there forms? Do you apply for something?
So we've got what we call Form 711, right? So you will come in at the CCMA and you will come to our help desk, and that's where you'll see our case management officers. So what we usually do is, depending on the nature of the dispute, I need to be very honest with you. There are different types of disputes, right? You deal with disputes concerning dismissals. You deal with unfair labor practices, maybe where you've been issued with a warning. You deal with disputes whether you haven't been paid your salary. You deal with an issue, maybe you haven't been given your sick leave at the workplace. But there are other disputes that are there that are very sensitive. Maybe where a person is saying, I'm being discriminated against at work, or alternatively, I'm being harassed at work. So because of the nature of the dispute, we don't deal with it the same, right? So that means some disputes are so sensitive, and you'll be surprised. Some people have been sexually assaulted, even in the workplace. Some people have been literally physically attacked at the workplace. So you will find that in those type of cases, we'll take you to a separate area where we'll consult with you because of the sensitivity that is attached to those type of disputes. So from the moment you walk in, we try and you sit down, we try to find out what is the main issue. So because there are different disputes and people are not aware of the legal jargons and the law and how it's applicable, we then redirect you to say, okay, because based on what you have said to me, this might be what the issue is, so you will refer this dispute. So you will fill in a form, and majority of the time you'll find that employees don't have money to say, listen, I can go and fax it to the employer or I can give them a copy. We will do that for you. So you fill in the form, we will ask for the details of the employer, and afterwards we will basically fax it, send it via email to the employer so that they get a copy of the main complaint. So the 711 will give the employer a general synopsis, a general idea of what the dispute is about.
So you are saying the employer must be aware that I have raised a dispute with the CCMA, and by getting the 711 form through the CCMA.
Yes. So we will make sure that the employer gets a copy. So that's the reason why majority of the time when people come in, we'll always ask them and say, do you have a phone number and or do you have an email address for the employer or a number where we can send the form? Sometimes employees will say to us, listen, I don't necessarily have the email address or I don't necessarily have the person that you're supposed to send these documents to. What we then do is we ask you for the number. Whilst you're sitting there, we'll actually give them a phone call and we'll call call the employer, we'll be like, listen, we're from CCMA. We want to send these documents to you. Do you mind just giving us an email address? Alternatively, a fax number. Alternatively, a physical address if they don't have a fax number or email address where we can send the documents via post. So we will do all of that. And sometimes we also send it via post for the employees as well. So we have to make sure that the other party, because as in any dispute, the other party must know what the complaint is about. So we then know, then the employer will then become aware, okay, there is this complaint at the CCMA. When a matter comes before us, we've also got a turnaround time. So we set it down within 14 days from the time that it's been referred. And when I mean been referred, that means also we've also served it on the employer. After it's been served, we set it down within 14 days. It's set down for what we call a conciliation and an arbitration joined into one. It's called a con-arb. So when we set it down for con-arb, you will get a notification and a date. We also send reminders via SMS so that parties are quite aware that beforehand that, listen, the dispute is set down for this date and this time. And in the conciliation process, that's when you'll get to meet a commissioner. And then the commissioner will basically, in that process, it's very informal. So we use formal and informal processes. So conciliation is very informal, it's without prejudice, it's off the record. And when a person says, I feel scared to come to the CCMA, I understand. It can be very nerve-wracking, to be quite honest. And to be quite honest, it's like going to a court. When you go there, you're just thinking, a majority of the time, I know, because sometimes I would stammer, and you would find that people generally feel very nervous. And the main role when we're the CCMA is to try and make you feel comfortable. Because our main aim is not to try and make things worse or even make things more tense between you and the employer. So you'll find that sometimes I'll even say to an employee, do we need to get you a glass of water just so that you calm down and you're okay? And sometimes it helps when you've got the union as well, because the union aids the process just to make the applicant feel more comfortable and to make them realize that, listen, it's really us trying to come to a point where we help you reach an amicable solution to your dispute. However, if we see or come to a point where we genuinely realize that here we cannot come to a point where we get to a solution, we will go to the more formal process, which is the arbitration. And arbitration is where we will definitely hear evidence. And evidence means we'll hear direct evidence from you. We'll also get evidence in the form of documentary evidence. We'll also get evidence in the form of circumstantial evidence. We'll also get evidence in the form of videos as well, even WhatsApp messages is a form of evidence. And the process is recorded. There's a video recording like here, and there's also a voice recording, and you actually go under oath. And then there will be a decision that is rendered by the CCMA that you'll also receive within 14 days.
Okay. Okay. You mentioned that sometimes people would come with a union,
Yes.
and you will find there are people who are not in the formal employment. They may be a domestic worker working as a cashier at a shop. They don't have a lawyer. Correct. They don't have a union. And someone may want to bring a relative or somebody they trust that will speak on their behalf if they feel they are not in a position to speak. Would you allow such a representation for people?
Well, it's a bit of a, can I be honest with you? It's a bit of a catch-22 situation, right? The reason why I say it's a bit of a catch-22 situation where you're stuck between a rock and a hard place is because there are nefarious characters out there. There are some people that charge people when they come to the CCMA, in the sense that a person will come. Our services, remember, at CCMA are free of charge. We don't charge anything. Then a person will say, you said you can come to CCMA, I will represent you, but if you're to get a settlement, I need to get 50%. Or I need to get 40%, which defeats the purpose of CCMA, because our main aim is to reach the marginalized employees and to reach employees that cannot get access to justice in normal courts. That's why we're a quasi-judicial institution. So now, if you're bringing in somebody, anyone can come and say, this is my relative. And this person later on harasses you and says, give me a portion of the money that you've gotten from CCMA. Because remember, any money that you get in a settlement doesn't come to us as CCMA. It goes directly to the employee. We don't even get your banking details because of the POPI Act. It goes directly to the employee. And the person can say, no, you put it in my account. Now, we have not helped the employee in that instance. So as CCMA, when we're dealing with parties where they say, I need a relative or I need somebody else who's not legally trained to represent me, we've got a process for that at the CCMA. So it's under our rules, and it's under Rule 25, Rule Sub Rule 6. What that basically means is we cater for those situations. They have to make an application. We have to consider the application, and they must show us that it's a genuine application where you are genuinely trying to assist us. So let's say, for instance, you're dealing with issues of discrimination or harassment or inequality. You've got NGOs that genuinely help people. We accept those applications. You've got what we call paralegals. We accept those applications. You've got people who might have worked in the legal field, but they're not legally lawyers or legal practitioners or candidate attorneys. Under that rule, we consider your application and we do allow representation. Because there's some cases, to be quite honest, you can see that an employee won't be able to handle this on their own. They won't necessarily be able to understand the rules of evidence. They won't necessarily be able to understand what they need to bring to the CCMA and how to handle it. So there's certain circumstances where we'll say, yes, we will allow the representation, will allow you to assist. However, there's certain instances where perhaps if we see that the nature of the relationship is such that there won't be any oversight or control. Because remember, lawyers are managed by the law society, same as the medical professional. You've got a society, a council that regulates your affairs. Same with traditional healers. There's actually Traditional Healers Association. So they've got an oversight body, same with accountants. So the only problem with allowing parties to be represented by a person, let's say, who they say a relative, is the oversight. Because remember, there's a code of ethics even for commissioners. There's a code of conduct as well. So what we try and do is to strike a balance to ensure that this person is being genuine and there's no abusive process where you are then getting money in terms of the employee. They've been reinstated, and some people will say, you need to give me contingencies in terms of your provident fund or pension. And we want to try and avoid those abuses in terms of the process. So we do allow it, but they're just mechanisms where there needs to be an application and attached documents where we actually see that this is a genuine application to try and assist the employee, because that's what we're here to do, is to ensure there's social justice, and we're guided by the concept of fairness. And I think that's the most important thing, being fair to the parties, making sure that the employee is genuinely assisted. And you know what? In most cases where I'm dealing with umama or utata, even umama or utata who work on a farm, do you know what we do? Commissioners actually are allowed to assist. Yes, we are. We actually allowed to assist umama and utata and be able, if they're not able to ask the relevant questions or not able to necessarily know what they need to bring. That's why we're here. We're there to also empower, to advise, to guide, and say, umama, maybe do this. Utata, maybe do this. Maybe let's look at it from this way. That's why we're also here, because we're not here as figureheads, as commissioners, to sit here and be, yes, we're supposed to be impartial, but we're also there to empower, to guide, to facilitate, and to ensure that by the time they leave, we've made life a bit better for them, I think. So we actually also there to assist the party. We actually allowed to do that, as long as in assisting the employee or umamotata, we're also being fair to the employer. So we always try to make sure that we strike a balance between the two. Yeah. And I know that a lot of people are not aware of that. They're not, because they're like, commissioners assist. Yes, we actually do. We actually enjoined, especially with unrepresented parties, we actually enjoined by the law to actually assist them, to actually lend them a hand. It's called a helping hand principle, to actually aid them. So that's what we're actually also supposed to do.
At least people have got nothing to be scared of.
Oh, they mustn't fear at all. They mustn't fear at all.
All right. Our next question, we just want to know, what criteria must a dispute meet for the CCMA to intervene and handle the case? And following that, are there specific types of disputes that fall outside the CCMA's jurisdiction?
Yes, they are. Remember I said to you when I started, and I said to you, you'll be surprised the majority of the issues that come to us, sometimes they've got nothing to do with the law. Sometimes it's more the human things about it. It's more the peripheral things that we're dealing with at home that affect things at work, and that's the reality, and we can't run away with it. So for us to deal with an issue, it starts with one thing. There must be conflict. There must be a dispute. When there's a dispute, a person approaches us, we are there as the third party to be impartial, to then intervene and say, how can we help you resolve this issue? So CCMA comes in when there is conflict, right? So we are more on the reactive spectrum. That's why I said to you, we're the last port of call, because basically a person is saying, I've tried everything internally and I've not been able to resolve it. And that's the reason why I find myself here at the CCMA at this point in time. Now, because we deal with a dispute, there are different types of dispute. In the labor market, what a lot of people are not aware of is that there are different legislations that apply. So I'll just give you just a few scenarios and examples so that I break it down in a way that is understandable, right? So let's say, for instance, your services are terminated. If your services are terminated, you are going to bring your dispute under the Labor Relations Act, right? So it will come to us, you'll refer an unfair dismissal dispute, and you will go through the process in terms of a con-arb, right? But let's say, for instance, you know that there's the national minimum wage, and you are saying my rate per hour is not per the National Minimum Wage Act. You can also bring that dispute. But remember, it's not an unfair dismissal dispute. It's just a situation where you're saying, I'm supposed to be paid this rate per hour, but my employer is not paying me. And your viewers will know the national minimum wage has increased from the 1st of March 2024, right? Same thing, let's say, for instance, an employee is saying, listen, I was sick for 5 days. I had sick leave. I brought in my medical certificate, but I wasn't paid for my sick leave. That dispute can be brought in terms of Section 73A of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, where you say, I'm entitled to my sick leave, I wasn't paid my sick leave, right? Alternatively, an employee can come and say, listen, I'm in the workplace. I want to say something that a lot of people are confronted with. I'm in the workplace, and perhaps I had applied for a job. I had acted in this position for a very long time, but I wasn't promoted, and somebody else was promoted. But I feel like the actions of the employer and their policy was discriminatory. That dispute is brought in terms of the Employment Equity Act. So there are different forms of legislation that apply. There's very different disputes that apply. Then you can find a topic that I know that everybody is quite aware of gender-based violence, because it's also there in the workplace. You might have been confronted with a situation where somebody has made inappropriate remarks and constantly they're picking on you, commenting on what you're wearing, commenting on your children, commenting on your sexuality, alternatively making very inappropriate comments that are very sexualized. And then it's come to a point, maybe you've reported it in the workplace, but no action has been taken. That dispute comes to us in terms of Section 60 of the Employment Equity Act, where we now look at it and we now say, you've reported this issue to the employer. What steps did the employer take? Were they reasonable? Did they try to eliminate this in the workplace? Did they try to mitigate against it? Was it reasonable or not? And in this instance, did they try to reasonably deal with the issue and deal with the perpetrator in order to ensure that it's not a hostile working environment? So with the different disputes, there are different mechanisms that CCMA basically employs to try and deal with the dispute. So let's say I'm going to deal with the dispute on a collective basis. What do I mean when I mean collective? Let's say you're having a strike action, or alternatively, you've got a standoff at work and things are very tense and it's very tumultuous. And let's say it's not even a strike. CCMA can get involved in a collective dispute in terms of Section 150 of the LRA, where it's what we call a Section 150 intervention, where we meet with all the various stakeholders and we say, listen, for the interest of the labor market, how best can we resolve this issue? Let's try and help all of you meet in the middle. Let's try help all of you come up with a solution that is workable also in the future. So everything that we try and do, there's different mechanisms that we employ, but we always try by all means to build the workplace relations.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify something to the viewers that the criteria that must be met is a dispute between the employer and the employee, not your friend or your husband or your aunt. It's
No.
specific to the employer and the
employee.
employee. Okay, thank you. I just want to confirm something.
Yes.
What falls outside the CCMA jurisdiction? Do you have any specific, maybe something that is for the Department of Labor? Because sometimes people
There are aspects that we don't have jurisdiction over. So let me give you an example. You'll find like the Occupational Health and Safety Act. There are certain disputes or IODs. We don't deal with that. IOD, for your viewers, I know it's an acronym. It means injury on duty. So if you've been injured on duty, it doesn't come to us because you have to go to a medical doctor. There's a process that you have to go through that goes through Department of Labor. Let's say you've got a UIF claim that also doesn't come to us. We actually don't have the systems for that. That also goes to Department of Labor. You know, during COVID, you had the TERS claim, right, where there was the TERS that was being paid out. That also doesn't come to us. That also goes to Department of Labor. Let's say, for instance, you've got situations where your working conditions, you're working at night, and there's an issue with your PPEs and your protective gears and how the working conditions are. Because we don't have labor inspectorate at CCMA, that goes to Department of Labor, and they basically send labor inspectors to your workplace, and they basically investigate and they actually issue a report on it. So there's certain mechanisms that we don't have that goes to Department of Labor. And also there's certain claims that go to small claims court, doesn't come to us, where employees from cooperative, they actually go to small claims court or use other mechanisms, and it doesn't necessarily come to us. I think maybe one thing that I haven't specified for your viewers is that we deal with employer-employee relations. Remember, when you sign a contract, sometimes people don't realize that you're an independent contractor. So if you're an independent contractor, we actually can't deal with your case. Or if you're a shareholder, we can't. So you'll find, like, if you're a business owner, if it's a dispute between a business owner, we can't deal with it because it's business owner to business owner. Or let's say you'll find that sometimes it's an issue where a mother and a son own a real estate agent and they've got a dispute and you're both business owners, you're equal stakeholders. We can't deal with it. So there's certain disputes that don't fall within our purview. Another issue that is always sticky is where a lot of people are not aware that, let's say, on a farm, you stay on the farm, right? And you're a worker and you're also an employee and you're a tenant there. And then you get terminated. Maybe you've stayed on that farm for 20 years. Now, your services have been terminated, but remember, there's also occupancy at that farm.
Two different things.
Correct. Then those are two very different things. And now those things are then brought before the commission, because now I'm dealing with the termination, but there's also an issue of your living, your accommodation, you see. So we always find ourselves confronted with those things within our jurisdiction where people ask us, okay, now how do we deal with these things? It also happens with church disputes, because remember, church is also an employer where you've got a person who is a church member staying at the church, but is also maybe an admin clerk at the church. Your services have been terminated, but I stay at the parish at the back. Now, the church is saying, I've terminated your service, but I'm still a member. But I'm still staying here. Now, how do you balance that out? So we always deal with things. That's why I said to you when I started that we actually, half the time, we deal with a lot of psychology and a lot of humanness in terms of your day-to-day, plus the employment relationship. But there are a lot of things also that fall outside our purview as CCMA. But we'll always try and assist the parties and also redirect them in terms of the right channel that they must follow.
I'm sure viewers are clear now. People cannot just tell the CCMA that I've been chased out of my rental house.
Exactly.
It has got nothing to do with CCMA.
Correct.
There's another body that can deal with that.
Correct.
Then can you also provide, Geraldine, insight into the success and failure rate of cases handled by the CCMA? What factors contribute to the success or failure of a dispute resolution process?
Okay.
Can I be very candid with you when I say that I never like to look at it as success and failure? And the reason why I never like looking at it as success and failure is because I never like a party to leave the CCMA and feel like I failed. I think the main issue with CCMA when we're dealing with disputes, number one, is not only to build a relationship. Number two is to try and look for a sustainable solution. So when we are dealing with conciliation, you will see, I think a lot of people, your viewers, if they've ever gone to CCMA, you'll find the commissioner will say to you, there's no party that's right or wrong. It's the same thing in a negotiation. There's no party that's right or wrong. My main aim is a give and take between both parties. So it's like any relationship, it's a give and take between both parties, and you're trying to reach middle ground. So you'll find that there's certain cases, unfortunately, when you're dealing with a dismissal, there's certain cases where you will have a situation where one party will end up winning their case and the other party will end up losing their case. But it's not necessarily win or lose, but it's more so of what's fair in that case. So you'll find a situation, let's say if an employee has stolen cable wires and the value is 100,000, or if your employee has been involved in corrupt activities and they're worth 1 million. For me, it's not about who's won and who's lost. It's more so of what's fair in the workplace. You've cost the business, it affects other employees. What's fair in this instance? The fairness is the services are then terminated because at the end of the day, you've done something wrong, and wherever you're going to go, you can't condone something that is wrong and say that it's right. You can't rubber stamp it, right? Then there are instances where, for instance, when you're dealing with harassment dispute, it's not a situation where it's success and failure. It's more so of how do we eliminate inequality within the workplace? How do we ensure transformation happens at a grassroots level? How do we ensure that everybody has equal opportunity? How do we ensure that everybody has got equal access? And how do we ensure that we improve the workplace? So in that instance, it's not a win-lose. It's more of transformation at a grassroots level. So when it comes to CCMA success and failure, it's not about success and failure. It's more of how are we contributing to the greater good in the labor landscape to try and change it and transform it such that, for instance, if it's dismissal disputes, and we are seeing that we're getting a lot of dismissal disputes from the security sector, what CCMA will do is we're going to have initiatives where we've got what we call a DMP department that will go out and we'll do a lot of workshops with unions, with employees to empower them so that they're aware of what's a misconduct, what's not, what's right, what's wrong. Because you know what? When people know better, they do better. So what happens is then you will realize then there's a drastic decline in referrals for dismissals, because now when people know, okay, when I am disobeying my employer and I talk back at them, that's actually insubordination. That means I mustn't do that. I must employ a different method. If I'm unhappy with you, I mustn't talk back at you. Maybe what I need to do is to sit with you like I'm sitting with you now and discuss it, just like I would with my parent or my sister. And maybe we might come to a different resolution than me shouting. A person will realize instead of me stealing because I'm stealing bread because I want to feed my child at home, maybe I can go to my HR and ask for a soft loan and sign an acknowledgement of debt instead of taking that toilet paper or that piece of bread in the canteen and then being charged with theft. So it's not a matter of success or failure. I think for us, holistically looking at it, it's more so of putting in interventions, mechanisms on building the labor landscape as a whole and transforming it and ensuring that by all means, we've got less reactiveness, but more proactiveness in how we deal with employment disputes.
Thanks. The next question for you, Geraldine, is there is a perception that the CCMA may lean towards being pro-employer or pro-employee. How does the CCMA ensure a fair and balanced decision-making process that considers the interests of both parties?
Honestly, when you're dealing with any form of dispute, one party is going to feel maligned. One party is going to feel like you're taking one party's side and you're not necessarily taking my side and you're not seeing things from my perspective. I think there's just been a lot of perceptions and assumptions where CCMA is concerned that, listen, we are pro-employee. We hear those arguments, and we hear arguments of we also pro-employer. And I think the reason, one of the things that we try and do to try and remove those types of assumptions and perceptions, you realize is we always try to strike a balance between the two. And in striking a balance, how do we do that? You'll find that even when you walk in, I'm not going to be overly friendly with the employer. I'm going to try and make both of you feel comfortable. I am going to try and ensure that I hear both of you. So it requires active listening from both sides. Because remember, for somebody to say you're pro-employer, it means they feel that you're listening more to the employer side than you are listening to their side. They feel like their voice is not being heard. They feel like their needs are not being met. They feel that you're not necessarily digging in and finding out what is the real issue. So the way we try and remove those perceptions is by ensuring, number one, that there's active listening on both sides. Number two is to tailor make solutions that cater for both sides. Number three is where we see that, listen, we can't reach a solution here. We will then go to the more formal process where we make the decision. But even when in making that decision, I always say we write the decision in such a way that it empowers both parties, that they're able to understand why is it that we've come to this perspective, why is it that we've come here. The reality is the only reason why employees will come to us is because they feel like they need somebody who's on their side, that will understand, that will actually take time to hear their side without necessarily taking the company's side. So we are trying to help employees realize that we actually there to make their life at work easier. We actually there to build relations there. We actually there not to take the employer's side, but to actually help it be mutually beneficial. And I think also with the employer, that's the same thing we do with them. We always say to them, we're not here to take the employee side. We're here genuinely to try and help both of you because it's a mutually beneficial relationship. Remember, at the end of the day, you're not going to work for free. And the employer is not getting those services for free. It's mutually beneficial. It's a reciprocal relationship. So I think when it's a reciprocal relationship, both parties must realize that they've got an invested interest. And we're trying to make them realize that they've got more in common than differences. That's actually how we try and remove those perceptions. Number one, through communication, active listening. Number three, in helping, in empowerment, in the information that we also provide them with, and in also how we relate to the parties. And also that also means sometimes employing language practitioners to bridge the gap so that both parties can understand in a language in a form that they can, that is much more understandable to them.
Okay. Thanks. For individuals preparing to bring a dispute to the CCMA, what advice do you have regarding the necessary documentation, evidence, and preparation for a successful case?
If you're bringing a case to the CCMA, to be quite honest, I don't want to make it seem like it's a full on court case because if I do that, then it's going to make somebody feel more nervous. It's going to be a much more nerve wracking process. But when you're coming to the CCMA, I believe that the most important thing that needs to be done is remember we filter things through our own subjective perception. And because of that, we've got a lens through which we look at disputes. When you're coming, it's important that you gather all the necessary information. And when I mean information, it's not only documents. This also includes your witnesses, people that know the story, not have heard about the story, but that know the story. That means people have got direct knowledge of the events that you are complaining about. So it's either somebody who's observed it or somebody that is involved in the dispute who can come and corroborate the version that you're bringing before the CCMA. So you'll have that. That will be tangible evidence. That will be direct witnesses that you can bring. You also bring in, let's say, if you're complaining about money and you're saying, I haven't been paid, you can bring your bank statement and say, listen, I was paid last month, but if you look at my bank statement, no money has come in this month. So your bank statement becomes your documentary evidence that you can use to show that. So you've got documentary evidence, you've got your witnesses. Sometimes what you can also use, as I said, we're living in a digital world. You can also use your WhatsApp. You can use video evidence or even voice recording. I've had so many employees coming in and saying, Commissioner, I recorded this process. I recorded this conversation. I can show that, you know what? My boss said some very derogatory things to me during a conversation that we're having. I had an employee who, she was training to be a sangoma, and she was going through the process. And you know that in terms of traditional healer, it takes approximately like 6 months, depending, of course. I stand corrected. For some, it can take longer. And they had a conversation with their line manager who was a Christian, and they felt offended by it. And they said, "Oh my God, you're just a fake sangoma," and said things along the lines of, I need to take you to church, and you need to be loosed of, it's like demonic activity. I'm just giving you as an example, because we're dealing with a very diverse culture. That is something that's derogatory. Why? Because we've got different religious beliefs. We've got different things that we believe in, and we must learn to respect others. So if I'm practicing to be a sangoma and somebody says that to me, what happens? That's actually derogatory, right? That you're actually infringing on their rights. Or let's say if it's a Christian and somebody says, listen, I'm observing fasting during this period, then you're like, oh my God, that's just useless. That actually doesn't work. That's part of also workplace bullying. So somebody would come with video recordings or voice recordings as evidence to say this person was here when my manager said this. Or somebody can say I'm observing Ramadan, or with Muslims they have to go to the mosque every Friday, and somebody will be like, oh, but why are you going to the mosque? And they would make some sort of offhand remark that would really be offensive in terms of your religion. And a person can bring in evidence to say, look at the email that they wrote. That email is evidence. Or look, I had this direct witness, or I've got this recording, or they sent me a WhatsApp when I was asking for time to go to the mosque. And that WhatsApp evidence becomes evidence. So in preparing for a case, I know that sometimes people feel, gosh, I need to have a lot. I always say the devil is in the detail. Small things might seem like, oh, it's inconsequential, but they end up making such a huge difference. So you've got documentary evidence that you must bring with a payslip, bank statements. You've got your witnesses. Bring in your witnesses that were directly involved in the incident or observed it or were part and parcel of that conversation. Another thing that you can bring is your employment contracts. Let's say you're challenging your employment conditions and terms of your contract. You bring in your employment contract. You bring in collective agreements. You bring in anything that you think will aid and assist your case in a nutshell. That's what you do. So in preparing anything that will ever assist your case and make it stronger, that's what you bring. That's what you prepare for. So you bring in documents, you bring in direct witnesses, you bring in video recordings, you bring in voice recordings, you bring in bank statements, you bring in any form of evidence that will strengthen and corroborate your version. That's the evidence that you'll basically bring.
Right. How does the CCMA use mediation in dispute resolution, and what advantages does mediation offer in comparison to arbitration?
Can I be honest with you? I know maybe I'm not supposed to say this, but I actually prefer mediation, right? Because I think mediation, you get the human aspect of it. And arbitration, it's like very final, it's a very binding decision. Because arbitration, what happens is we hear evidence, it's more like in formal court, and then what happens is the commissioner makes the decision. The parties don't necessarily have input in the decision that I'm going to make in arbitration. So remember, in arbitration, you got two people who are at loggerheads, right? And you're at loggerheads, and because you're at loggerheads, you've got your version, the employer has got their version, but I always say there's a third version. There's always three sides to every story. And I know everybody's always heard there's two sides. No, there's three sides. There's your side, there's the employer side. The third side is the evidence, because the evidence always speaks for itself. Mediation is different, because mediation, I get to sit with you like this. I get to talk to you. I get to get to the crux and the core of what is a real issue that you're struggling with. Mediation, I get to delve a bit deeper. And it's more about emotional intelligence. And it's more about building interpersonal relationship. It's more, mediation for me is also more long term. So when I'm delving into mediation, I go behind the mask. I go behind what you're saying to me. I go to the nitty gritty and look at all the variables that are affecting you as an employee, and then be able to say, and because remember, mediation, I'm not looking at it through the lens of the law only. I look at it more on a wider scope, more holistically. Then say, what can we tailor make? How can we come up with a solution that deals with all these variables, even things that the law does not cater for? Because the reality is the law also has its limitations. Let's be honest, the law does have its limitations. So you'll find, let me give you an instance, like I told you about the issue where perhaps somebody is staying on the premises of the employer. There's certain things that I won't necessarily be able to write it in the arbitration award in terms of your living situation. But you'll find in mediation, because I'm dealing with you on a human being, to human being aspect. And I'll say, can we try and find a solution on this accommodation? It might not necessarily be my purview, but listen, this person's got children, they've got this, they've got that. Can we try and assist here? You find people are more open to saying, okay, maybe they can stay longer for this period. Maybe we can try and assist in this instance. Or maybe I can help with a moving truck. And I can help with this. Those are things that, in law, it's not catered for. But through mediation, you're able to assist with those things, and it goes a long way in assisting both parties. So I always feel that mediation it's not only about intervening It's about transforming the relationship between the parties. It's about empowering the parties. It's about guiding the parties. It's about facilitating. It's about finding sustainable solutions that transform the workplace. Because remember, arbitration is more individualized. I'm issuing an arbitration that will affect you only. But in mediation, let's say I'm dealing with a collective dispute, I'm dealing with it on a broader scheme, broader scale, broader spectrum, and you get to change a lot of people's lives. I think that there's innumerable benefits when you're looking at mediation as compared to just getting a binding decision. Because remember, when you get a binding decision, I'm not there to explain why I've made the decision. I'm not there to explain my reasoning behind it. Yes, I can try and explain it in an award, but remember, it's different. Unlike if a person is saying to you face to face, as compared to I'm reading it in a document. Have you ever seen when you're at school, when you read a document, it's different when somebody talks to you face to face and says, hang on, actually, I need to break this down in a way that's understandable. So I think that in that way, there's more of a connection. You build connection, you build relation, you transform. And I think there's more lasting change.
In dealing with complex cases, what strategies or approaches does the CCMA employ to ensure a thorough and fair resolution when cases are complex?
When cases are complex, I'm gonna divide it into three aspects to better explain it, right? When you're dealing with complex disputes, always remember there is a lot of subjective elements to every dispute. The main issue where CCMA is concerned and the strategy that we employ is number one, identify what is the source of the conflict. Number two, time and place of conflict, very important. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, let's say you're experiencing a volatile situation at work, and then the employer says, oh, but CCMA, I want you to come to our workplace. If we are to come to your workplace, sometimes it actually leads to a more tense and volatile situation because it's not neutral ground. It's not necessarily the message, but it's how you deliver the message and the timing that's equally important. So you would find that in like a wage dispute, it's easy in a collective dispute to deal with it in our premises at the CCMA. And it's easy in a wage dispute to also deal with it in a form and a language that people understand. If I'm dealing with a wage dispute or I'm dealing with farmers and I'm dealing with farm workers, I can't go there and explain things to them in English because they're going to look at me, they're going to be like, you just do not understand exactly what we're saying. Because wage disputes are complex. You're dealing with people's livelihoods, their bread and butter. So you have to explain it in the language and the form that they understand. You also have to take it from the volatile situation into neutral ground. You also have to be sure about how you're packaging it in a way that is relatable to a person on the ground. So the strategy that we employ is number one, how do I identify the problem? Number two, the time and the place. Number three, the deliverables. How are we delivering the message? Number four, how do we diffuse the situation? Number five, how do we look to reconcile the parties so that they see whether or not they've got differences or they've actually got more in common. So I kid you not, you'll be surprised. 99.9% you've got more in agreement, consensus. You've got more things in common than differences. So you would find that the strategy that we employ primarily is geared towards transformation, advising, facilitating, and empowering. So because of that, we would say, let's identify time and place, diffuse the situation, how do we deliver the message? And part of that requires you to have that emotional intelligence. Because remember, if I'm going to Umama, she's not going to understand, the law says this. Do you understand? Even if it's a complex dispute, she's going to understand more when we explain it in a language and a form that they understand and in a way that is palatable, and you break it down in a manner that they can understand, just like back in the day. Because remember, CCMA, actually, the way you look at CCMA, I want you to look at it from A Long Walk to Freedom, Nelson Mandela's book, right? Remember back in the day, when you had a dispute, what would you do? You would go to your elders, and they would have a group of elders, actually. And then you would mention, and you would have different inputs and people giving you different ideas on how to resolve the issue. When they would sit there, their main aim, remember CCMA, our main aim is not to impose a solution on you. Our strategy is to say, can we hear the dispute? As we're hearing the dispute, can we try to collectively come up with a solution? that helps everybody in the entirety. So it's about looking at it holistically. So the stratagem or the strategy has always been, how can we transform? How can we empower? How can we guide? And that comes to looking at the source. So we always go back to the root cause, the source, identify time, how you're delivering it, diffuse the situation, and how do you transform. So whatever solution we come up with is meant to transform the workplace.
How does the CCMA contribute to educating both employer and employees about their rights and responsibilities, as well as the dispute resolution process that are available to them?
So remember I said we've got a DMP division in CCMA. So a lot of people are not aware we develop material as CCMA. So we've actually got material that deals with all aspects of the labor market. We've got material that deals with employment equity. And employment equity, that means we're dealing with structural inequality within the workplace. We've got material that deals with situations where maybe you and I in the same workplace and you're saying I'm not being provided with training opportunities, but she's being provided with training opportunities. So we've got material that deals with that. We've got material that deals with basic employee rights. So what we do is we actually have got what we call intervention and workshop and training workshops that we have. So we actually go out into the community. It's not a situation where we sit in high-rise buildings, in offices, and we're expecting employees to come to us. No. So you'll find we go to universities, we go to schools, we go into the community, we do community outreach programs, and we actually contribute as CCMA. Even some of our commissioners, they donate into the community because that's our mandate. Our mandate is a social mandate. It's about building social networks, social relationship with our stakeholders, and ensuring that we strengthen the labor market, because we realize the labor market cannot function without who? Human beings, because employees are human beings. So because of that, we do a lot of training initiatives. You find that even in church, we've got flyers. You'll find that we even give flyers to Department of Labor. We give flyers to companies, and we invite them. And our training is for free. And we actually go out and we'll say, listen, we want to give training to domestic workers. We want to give training to security guards. We want to give training to people in the retail sector so that they're aware of their rights. So we do training in all sectors to ensure that everybody is empowered. They know exactly what their rights are. And our training is geared to both the employers and the employees. So you'll find even with government departments, we've been invited to Department of Health, we've been invited to Department of Education. We have trained their management on the policies, on how to deal with employees, on how to manage conflict, on how to deal with building workplace relations. So we've got all those training interventions that we actually employ and we offer in order to ensure that we are not a body that's just a monolith. We just an institution that is a building. No, we want to be your flesh and blood. We want it to be accessible to the man in the street, so that if you were to go and ask somebody who's CCMA, they'll be able to tell you this is what CCMA is about. If you've got an issue, you need free advice, approach CCMA. They're going to give you that free advice, and you're going to walk out of there and you know exactly how to deal with your workplace situation. So we've got our call centers, we've got our helplines, we've got walk-ins that can come to our help desk at the CCMA, but we've got also training interventions, a department that actually runs it, that we actually go into the communities on a weekly basis. Actually, we do it on a weekly basis, and we actually offer trainings to unions, securities, domestic workers, all sectors. We offer training, and it's for free.
Oh, wow, thanks. What initiatives? I think you may have touched on this, but what we want to know, what initiatives that the CCMA have in place for continuous improvement and staying ahead, updated on evolving labor and employment issues.
One of the things that we usually do, and I know that that's why I said there's a lot of components to CCMA that people are not aware of. We've actually got a research unit. Yeah, we've got a research unit. Research unit actually looks into the labor market trends. We've also got a CCMA blog. So what we do is we try to basically have our hands on the ground, where our research unit will look at what is working, what is not working. Remember, the fact that we as a CCMA are constantly evolving, we're constantly evolving because we see what's working, what's not, and we try to improve on the past so that we become better in the future. So you will find, for instance, initially we never used to allow relatives or NGOs to represent people at the CCMA, right? But because we saw that we're dealing with a lot of cases of harassment and gender-based violence, and you know that it's highly emotional, we had to do our research. So we did research and we found that, listen, 1 in 4 women is abused, even in the workplace. We realized that majority of the people, 34% of men face harassment. They don't come forward. We realized 40% of women are silent. So then we realized if people are silent concerning these issues, it means that they feel like they don't have a voice. If we are not allowing representation by people who are not legally trained, we're actually acting as a barrier. So what our research department did was to look into that research, look at our policies, say this policy is not working because it's not leading to transformation. So in order to evolve, we now need to amend our policies in order to allow for that and evolve as an institution. Another way that we evolve as an institution, let me give an example. Let's say a person has, because we've got time frames, the CCMA. So for you to refer, let's say an unfair dismissal dispute, you've got 30 days. You would find that previously we said you need to apply for condemnation if you're out of the 30-day period, and you need to, for that condemnation, there needs to be a commission of oaths. We saw that a lot of employees don't have access to that, right? So instead of saying, oh, there needs to be a commission of oaths and it needs to be stamped, we said an employee can just bring in a written statement to support their condemnation. It removes that legal technicality of there needs to be commissioner of oaths, it needs to be an affidavit. So what we do is we've actually got a research unit that actually researches our own policies, our own rules, and we say, how can we improve them to ensure that there's social justice, there's transformation, there's empowerment, and there's guidance for employees. So we're constantly evolving, we're constantly changing, we're constantly trying to see how we can better the labor market. So then you'll find that if we see that there's an area where, okay, this is an area where we see there's a rise in referrals, but we're not necessarily meeting the need, how can we also capacitate our own commissioners, our own staff to be able to handle those disputes? How can we be able to capacitate them to be able to help the employees that also come in? So we're constantly evolving, we're constantly changing, we're also constantly amending our own rules, our own policies, and we're also constantly researching on how we can improve. And of course, hopefully, I will not let the cat out of the bag. We're also constantly having educational initiatives as CCMA where we're looking to empower. We're also in collaboration with the universities. That's how we're also evolving, where with HR students, law students, they can come and shadow the CCMA. Yes, we've also got that. They come and shadow us. They see how we deal with our processes. They get hands-on practical experience. So even for your HR interns or even HR students, they can come at the CCMA, even law students, shadow, see how we deal with disputes, get hands-on experience on mediation, conciliation, arbitration. Those are part of the evolving mechanisms that we're putting into place where we're saying our component is to look at the different avenues, education, training, workshop, empowerment, research, and be able to deliver something that is actually sustainable on a grassroots level and actually transforms the workplace.
Wow, it was mouthful. I'm sure our viewers have learned a lot, and I wish we had more time.
I wish so. This has been fantastic. And thank you for inviting us again.
And once again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure we will continue to call you as and when the viewers want to learn something from you. I hope you are open to that.
No, definitely. I mean, you can have your viewers call in and people give different scenarios and cases and basically get practical hands-on advice on how to actually deal with the dispute. Because I don't want the law is actually accessible. The law is not high up there and everybody's here. The law is actually meant to improve your life, to make it better. And I'm hoping that through the session that everybody has felt that they've learned something, but that the law is more accessible to them.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
It was an insightful session. I wish really we had more time, but unfortunately, time is money. And the production has been reminding me that time is out of time is off and we cannot continue. Thank you once again, viewers at home. I hope you learned something today. Please do write to us by comments in all our social network platforms. You'll find us on Facebook, you find us on Instagram, you find us in LinkedIn, and you find us on YouTube, please do communicate with us. We'd love to hear what you're thinking about these sessions. Please do subscribe as well. This is going to help you and in your career as well. There are more opportunities. Next time we are going to have the Department of Labor, and there's a lot for you. We just want you to get educated and not just be an employee that does not know what is happening around you. Thank you once again. This is Cikizwa Vezile, and you were with us as the HR office and a podcast. Thank you once again. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.